Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be reviewing something quite special, and I say that quite a bit, but it doesn't ring any less true. So today we're going to be looking at the S.H.Figuarts Guts Berserker armor from the series Berserk. Now this is a really big deal just because Berserk is pretty much like a pillar of anime and manga in general. Without it, we wouldn't have a lot of franchises, or a lot of franchises wouldn't be the same without it. Like, we wouldn't have Dark Souls, or if we did have Dark Souls, it would have taken on an entirely different form. Definitely influenced a lot of dark gothic horror things, and just generally its entire aesthetic, its story, its structure, its characters, anything like that can be felt throughout basically the last 20 years of anime. And we owe a lot to it, even if you yourself are not a fan of it or haven't watched it. Its influence is felt pretty much everywhere. And while I have watched the original anime series and the Golden Age movies, I've barely dabbled in the manga and didn't watch the 2016, I think it was 2016 or 2015 series, because I didn't really like the CGI there. I did play the Dynasty Warriors style Musou game, which did quite a bit of the story, which was okay, but seeing as Berserk is in this sort of weird void of getting manga even though the author has passed away and no anime on the horizon, it doesn't get a whole lot of merch unless it's like a major anniversary, and that merch is usually quite expensive or very hard to get. And that's why it's important that we've got the S.H.Figuarts today, because Figma did a lot of figures some time ago, and they were reselling for insane amounts because you just can't get them anymore. And they were old molds and old engineering, and they were starting to show their age. They are still quite good, but you could tell that they were quite old. That's where S.H.Figuarts comes in, by actually having a new mold, new design, and new structure of a posable, small-scale Berserk figure. And so today we're going to be looking at Guts. They did just recently release a Griffith, and there is going to be a Berserker armor, like activated, transformed version coming next year, and we'll see if they do any more after that. So we are going to be looking at Guts today, and it has been a very long time since they've done something like this, and from what I've seen, it looks fantastic. So taking a quick look at the box, you can see it's designed a lot like other S.H.Figuarts, with a clear window into the front and a promo image on the front, but the promo image this time is actually drawn, and I believe it's one of the manga covers, and I think it lends to the aesthetic of this entire figure so much more. And then you've got your standard promo images along the sides and on the back, just showing what the figure comes with and what it can do. Now, taking Guts out of the box, you can see everything that he comes with, including this backing, which is, I think it's pronounced Berhilt. It's the weird face egg thing. I don't really remember its significance, but I do know that it is quite important to Berserk lore. And so here is Guts out of the box. You can see him just in the plastic shell. He comes with his massive slab of a sword, as well as a few accessories. So he's got 3 faces, he's got 3 pairs of hands, he's got alternate cannon arm and alternate crossbow arm, he's got his cape, he's got a bear hilt as well, and of course his massive sword. So taken out of the box and put on a display stand, here is Guts without his cape, just so you can see the main figure itself. Now aesthetically, this figure is probably one of the more elaborate that Tamashii Nations have tackled in recent years, just because there is an emphasis on less paint, better posability, or just generally a better feeling figurine. And it does feel like cost cutting in a lot of the time, but generally when you have a posable figure, the less paint the better, just so there's less chipping and things like that. Guts, there is a decent amount of paint and detail thrown throughout, just because there is so much going on design-wise for the figure, and you can see all of that come through. There's just so much going on, and they've really recreated this design pretty much perfectly. Proportionally, it does look a little strange. His arms do look very long, but when you get him into action poses, it seems quite natural, and I think that this was an intentional design decision to make the figure better. But you can just see all the little bits and pieces all the bags hanging off him, all the sharp details, the varying textures along the figure, just even the sharp and angled design of the Berserker armor itself, and making this opposable figure would have been so hard to do, but they somehow pulled it off. But anywhere you look on this figure, there is something to see. They've really done a fantastic job. Generally, the color matching to plastic parts and painted parts is quite good, but it is a bit noticeable on some parts of his arm, where it is quite clear that it is a difference in plastic. But it's fine, especially when, again, you put him in action poses, so it's not really a big bother. But there are also some really cool details, like on the back of his neck you can see a very clearly printed brand, which looks so good. It is actually partly indented into the back of his neck, so it looks really good. It's not just like a decal. And it is a bit of a shame that when you put on the cape, you do lose a lot of the back detail on this figure, just because there is a lot going on, and it is quite cool. But the cape, I think, brings the figure together, because the silhouette that it casts is a bit odd. But we'll go through posability without the cape, just because it's easier that way. So he's got a ball joint at the neck, which allows him to look down that far and up that far. There's a bit of stiffness in the neck, but generally it's okay. You can remove his collar, which is important for the cape, and it does just pop on and off pretty easily. So his arms can move out that far without any additional movement. He's got an upper arm swivel as well as a bend at the elbow, and his forearm on the mechanical arm can rotate because it is a swappable part. The hands are on a hinge joint, and you can just pop them out pretty easily. Now, he doesn't really have a butterfly, there's a sort of a ghost of a butterfly joint in there, and you can't really get his arms together too well, but if you sort of work the upper arm rotation, you can get his arms sort of close together. There's a ball joint in the torso, which allows the body to move around, and you do kind of need to be careful with it just because of all the daggers and accessories hanging off him, that they don't rub into each other or break, because I have heard of some breakages. But mine so far seems pretty okay. I have been pretty careful with it, but I have also tried to get it into some dynamic poses. And generally I think it holds together quite well. But yeah, there's just little ball joints all over his belt and accessories. Some of them move out of the way easier than others. But with it as is, he can kick forward that far, which is restricted a bit by his belt. And he can barely kick back at all. And he has a pretty good knee bend, all things considered. And there is a hinge at the ankle as well as a toe bend. He does also have slight thigh rotation, so you can swivel them a bit. Now his cape has got bendy wire throughout it, so you can pose it super dynamically and it looks really cool. You do need to work at it a bit, but I think it's worth it. But now with the cape attached, this is how Guts looks, and he looks fantastic. One slight aesthetic problem I would say is that I think the cape covers his shoulders just a little bit too much and he looks a tiny bit boxy. But again, when you put him in action poses, I think it clears that up really nicely. But all of the detail on the cape looks great. I do love the tattered look because it isn't just like torn cloth, it is intentionally cut in this way, which means that the cape will last a bit better, because if it is torn cloth, it's also very easy to rip that again and ruin it all. But I think they did a good job here, and it is a pretty necessary accessory. I think that without the cape in action poses, Guts does look quite weird, but I think that this cape was a very necessary addition. I do prefer it over the Figma cape, which I think was just a straight piece of cloth and you couldn't really pose it, and I think bendy wire is definitely the way to go for something like this. Now, Guts has three faces, so he's got a neutral face, he's got an angry shouting face, and a teeth-gritted angry face. And all of these faces look absolutely fantastic. The level of detail that they've gone into for these faces, compared to a lot of the other anime ones that I look at, like the Naruto ones and Dragon Ball ones, have a similar level of detail, but not this level of sculpt work, because a lot of this is sculpt and paint, and it's just absolutely incredible. It's just on a whole nother level, and almost makes me want them to go back and revisit some of the other older figures and work not just on the paintwork, which is good on faces right now, but also the sculpt work to make them seem even more unique. But again, they are trying to capture a specific aesthetic in this, and a lot was riding on the Berserk one paying off, and they've done a fantastic job here. Now, Guts does have his giant slab of a sword, and amazingly he can hold it up without a stand. I do recommend having a stand just because you don't want this toppling over and breaking anything, but I do think it is nice that they did engineer him so he can hold the sword. Without too much issue, you can balance it out pretty well. And he does look incredible with it, as he should really. But you can get him into some pretty cool dynamic poses, especially if you flip up the cape. And again, I do recommend a stand for any sort of action pose. But I did see this figure on display when I was in Japan recently, and I did want to try and recreate some of the poses, so that's what we'll be trying here today. And even though he is somewhat restrictive, I do think he is quite posable. You just sort of need to know what the joints can take, because I do think you need to be quite careful with him, especially when swapping out like the crossbow arm, because there's so much that can go wrong on that. But I do think you can get some pretty damn good poses. And again, the accessory work is great. The details on the crossbow in particular are absolutely fantastic. There's a lot going on in there. It is a little bit awkward swapping it out, but I do think it's quite good. The cannon arm is also good too. It's easier than the crossbow arm to swap out, and I think it similarly looks fantastic. Even though he doesn't have a lot of faces, I think that the 3 that they gave you is just enough to get Guts' emotions across and get him into, again, really good poses. When the Griffith comes out, or when I get the Griffith, I'm sure that I'll try and make a nice display with them both. And I think the Guts next year will be even better as well. I forgot to do a size comparison, so here is Guts next to S.H.Figuarts Luffy. And you can see that Guts is about the same size, probably just a little bit taller. And here he is next to a HG Gundam. This is the HG Gundam Ariel. So you can roughly see how he stands against other figures in the same sort of lines, or same sort of scaling. So he'd scale well with Figma, scale well with other S.H.Figuarts, and scale well with Gundam type figurines. So just that sort of 1/12-ish scale, I think he works quite well. He also does come out with the green belt, and I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Not really sure. If I am, I'm sorry. Anyway, he comes with the green belt, and it looks quite good. He doesn't really have a hand to hold it in. Like, you can rest it in one of his hands, and it's not really clear how you're meant to have him with the accessory, but it is nice to have nonetheless, and it is very well detailed. And yeah, it's just a really, really solid figure. I do think that they sacrificed posability for aesthetics in some areas, like having a proper butterfly joint, or slightly better posability in the legs and rotation around the waist and things like that, because I didn't feel like I could get an ab crunch, or if there was one, I might damage the belts and things like that. And you do have to be very careful when posing it, just because there's so many fiddly things with it. So I think that they definitely went more aesthetics than they did for sort of playability and posability, which is fine, and I think that works quite well. I think the Berserker armor one coming out next year, where he's transformed, I think he doesn't have as many of those little bits and bobs just on him. So I think we will get a better figure out of that, even if it is the exact same sculpt, which I think it will be tweaked a bit anyway. But I do think it is going to be a better figure further on. And I think inherently it is a good sculpt. It's just that, again, aesthetics are just holding it back a bit. But I do think it was a necessary sacrifice, and I do think the engineering we do have is still quite good. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It is a solid figure. There are some little hiccups, but I don't think it will really matter. And it definitely blows the Figma out of the water. Just absolutely fantastic looking figure, and I am happy that we finally have it. And I am keen to see what S.H.Figuarts do next. But that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I will see you all next time.